The set-up-to-fail syndrome. 59. Can't perform well without strict guidelines. When the subordinate senses these low expectations, it can undermine his self-confidence. This is particularly problematic because numerous studies confirm that people perform up or down to the levels their bosses expect from them, or indeed, to the levels they expect from themselves. 1. Of course, executives often tell us, "Oh, but I'm very careful about this issue of expectations. I exert more control over my underperformers, but I make sure that it does not come across as a lack of trust or confidence in their ability." We believe what these executives tell us. That is, we believe that they do try hard to disguise their intentions. When we talk to their subordinates, however, we see that these efforts are for the most part futile. In fact, our research shows that most employees can, and do, read their boss's mind. In particular, they know full well whether they tee into their bosses in group or out group. All they have to do is compare how they are treated with how their more highly regarded colleagues are treated. Just as the boss's assumptions about weaker performers and the right way to manage them explains his complicity in the set-up-to-fail syndrome, the subordinates' assumptions about what the boss is thinking explain his own complicity. The reason when people perceive disapproval, criticism, or simply a lack of confidence and appreciation, they tend to shut down, a behavioral phenomenon that manifests itself in several ways. Primarily, shutting down means disconnecting intellectually and emotionally. Subordinates simply stop giving their best. They grow tired of being overruled, and H6952.INP 59.2/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 60. They lose the will to GHT for their ideas. As one subordinate put it, "My boss tells me how to execute every detail. Rather than arguing with him, I've ended up wanting to say, 'Come on, just tell me what you want me to do. And I'll go do it.' You become a robot." Another perceived weak performer explained, "When my boss tells me to do something, I just do it mechanically." Shutting down also involves disengaging personally, essentially reducing contact with the boss. Partly, this disengagement is motivated by the nature of previous changes that have tended to be negative in tone. As one subordinate admitted, "I used to initiate much more contact with my boss until the only thing I received was negative feedback, then I started shying away." Besides the risk of a negative reaction, perceived weaker performers are concerned with not tainting their images further. Following the often heard aphorism, "Better to keep quiet and look like a fool than to open your mouth and prove it," they avoid asking for help for fear of further exposing their limitations. They also tend to volunteer less information. A simple heads up from a perceived underperformer can cause the boss to react and jump into action when none is required. As one perceived weak performer recalled, "I just wanted to let my boss know about a small matter, only slightly out of the routine, but as soon as I mentioned it, he was all over my case. I should have kept my mouth closed. I do now." Finally, shutting down can mean becoming defensive. Many perceived underperformers start devoting more energy to self-justification, anticipating that they will be personally blamed for failures. They seek to end the excuses. H6952.INB 62/18/16/956 AM. The setup to fail syndrome. 61. Early. They end up spending a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror and less time looking at the road ahead. In some cases, as in the case of Steve, the manufacturing supervisor described earlier, this defensiveness can lead to non-compliance or even systematic opposition to the boss's views. While this idea of a weak subordinate going head-to-head with his boss may seem irrational, it may re-ECT what Albert Camus once observed: when deprived of choice, the only freedom left is the freedom to say no. The syndrome is costly. There are two obvious costs of the setup to fail syndrome: the emotional cost paid by the subordinate and the organizational cost associated with the company's failure to get the best out of an employee. Yet there are other costs to consider, some of them indirect and long-term. The boss pays for the syndrome in several ways. First, uneasy relationships with perceived low performers of 10 sap the boss's emotional and physical energy. It can be quite a strain to keep up a facade of courtesy and pretend everything is any when both parties know it is not. In addition, the energy devoted to trying to ex these relationships or improve the subordinate's performance through increased supervision prevents the boss from attending to other activities, which often frustrates or even angers the boss. Furthermore, the syndrome can take its toll on the boss's reputation, as other employees in the organization observe his behavior toward weaker performers. If the boss's treatment of a subordinate is deemed unfair, H6952.INB 61/2/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 62. Or unsupportive, observers will be quick to draw their lessons. One outstanding performer commented on his boss's controlling and hypercritical behavior toward another subordinate. It made us all feel like we're expendable. As organizations increasingly espouse the virtues of learning and empowerment, managers must cultivate their reputations as coaches, as well as get results. The setup to fail syndrome also has serious consequences for any team. A lack of faith in perceived weaker performers can tempt bosses to overload those whom they consider superior performers. Bosses want to trust critical assignments to those who can be counted on to deliver reliably and quickly, and to those who will go beyond the call of duty because of their strong sense of shared fate. As one boss half-jokingly said, rule number 1, if you want something done, give it to someone who's busy. There's a reason why that person is busy. An increased workload may help perceived superior performers learn to manage their time better, especially as they start to delegate to their own subordinates more effectively. In many cases, however, these performers simply absorb the greater load and higher stress, which, over time, takes a personal toll and decreases the attention they can devote to other dimensions of their jobs, particularly those yielding longer-term BTS. In the Worst case scenario, overburdening strong performers can lead to burnout. Team spirit can also suffer from the progressive alienation of one or more perceived low performers. Great teams share a sense of enthusiasm and commitment to a H6952.INB 62.2/18/16/956 AM. The setup to fail syndrome. 63. Common mission. Even when members of the boss's out group try to keep their pain to themselves, other team members feel the strain. One manager recalled the discomfort experienced by the whole team as they watched their boss grill one of their peers every week. As he explained, a team is like a functioning organism. If one member is suffering, the whole team feels that pain. In addition, alienated subordinates often do not keep their suffering to themselves. In the corridors or over lunch, they seek out sympathetic ears to vent their recriminations and complaints, not only wasting their own time but also pulling their colleagues away from productive work. Instead of focusing on the team's mission, valuable time and energy is diverted to the discussion of internal politics and dynamics. Finally, the setup to fail syndrome has consequences for the subordinates of the perceived weak performers. Consider the weakest kid in the schoolyard who gets pummeled by a bully. The abused child often goes home and pummels his smaller, weaker siblings. So it is with the people who are in the boss's out group. When they have to manage their own employees, they frequently replicate the behavior that their bosses show to them. They fail to recognize good results or, more often, supervise their employees excessively. Breaking out is hard to do. The setup to fail syndrome is not irreversible. Subordinates can break out of it, but we have found that to be rare. The subordinate must consistently deliver such H6952.INB 63.2/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 64. Superior results that the boss is forced to change the employee from out-group to in-group status, a phenomenon made difficult by the context in which these subordinates operate. It is hard for subordinates to impress their bosses when they must work on unchallenging tasks, with no autonomy and limited resources. It is also hard for them to persist and maintain high standards when they receive little encouragement from their bosses. Furthermore, even if the subordinate achieves better results, it may take some time for them to register with the boss because of his selective observation and recall. Indeed, research shows that bosses tend to attribute the good things that happen to weaker performers to external factors rather than to their efforts and ability, while the opposite is true for perceived high performers. Successes tend to be seen as theirs, and failures tend to be attributed to external uncontrollable factors. The subordinate will therefore need to achieve a string of successes in order to have the boss even contemplate revising the initial categorization. Clearly, it takes a special kind of courage, self-confidence, competence, and persistence on the part of the subordinate to break out of the syndrome. Instead, what often happens is that members of the out-group set excessively ambitious goals for themselves to impress the boss quickly and powerfully, promising To hit a deadline 3 weeks early, for instance, or at tacking 6 projects at the same time, or simply attempt to handle a large problem without help. Sadly, such superhuman efforts are usually just that. And in setting goals so high that they are bound to fail, the subordinates H6962.64.2/18/16/956 am. The setup to fail syndrome. 65. Also come across as having had very poor judgment in the RST place. The setup to fail syndrome is not restricted to incompetent bosses. We have seen it happen to people archived within their organizations to be excellent bosses. Their mismanagement of some subordinates need not prevent them from achieving success, particularly when they and the perceived superior performers achieve high levels of individual performance. However, those bosses could be even more successful to the team, the organization, and themselves if they could break the syndrome. Getting it right. As a general rule, the RST step in solving a problem is recognizing that one exists. This observation is especially relevant to the setup to fail syndrome because of its self-fulfilling and self-reinforcing nature. Interrupting the syndrome requires that a manager understand the dynamic and, particularly, that he accept the possibility that his own behavior may be contributing to a subordinate's underperformance. The next step toward cracking the syndrome, however, is more difficult. It requires a carefully planned and structured intervention that takes the form of one, or several, candid conversations meant to bring to the surface and untangle the unhealthy dynamics that DNE the boss and the subordinate's relationship. The goal of such an intervention is to bring about a sustainable increase in the subordinate's performance, while progressively reducing the boss's involvement. It would be difficult, and indeed, detrimental, to provide a detailed script of what this kind of conversation H6952/18/16/956 am. Ongoing feedback. 66. Session should sound like a boss who rigidly plans for this conversation with a subordinate will not be able to engage in real dialogue with him, because real dialogue requires exability. As a guiding framework, however, we offer VE components that characterize effective interventions. Although they are not strictly sequential steps, all VE components should be part of these interventions. First, the boss must create the right context for the discussion. He must, for instance, select a time and place to conduct the meeting so that it presents as little threat as possible to the subordinate. A neutral location may be more conducive to open dialogue than an off-CE where previous and perhaps unpleasant conversations have taken place. The boss must also use affirming language when asking the subordinate to meet with him. The session should not be billed as feedback because such terms may suggest baggage from the past. Feedback could also be taken to mean that the conversation will be one-directional, a monologue delivered by the boss to the subordinate. Instead, the intervention should be described as a meeting to discuss the performance of the subordinate, the role of the boss, and the relationship between the subordinate and the boss. The boss might even acknowledge that he feels tension in the relationship and wants to use the conversation as a way to decrease it. Finally, in setting the context, the boss should tell the perceived weaker performer that he would genuinely like the interaction to be an open dialogue. In particular, H6952.INB 66.2/18/16/956 AM. The setup to fail syndrome. 67. He should acknowledge that he may be partially responsible for the situation and that his own behavior toward the subordinate is fair game for discussion. Second, the boss and the subordinate must use the intervention process to come to an agreement on the symptoms of the problem. Few employees are ineffective in all aspects of their performance, and few, if any, employees desire to do poorly on the job. Therefore, it is critical that the intervention result in a mutual understanding of the specific job responsibilities in which the subordinate is weak. In the case of Steve and Jeff, for instance, an exhaustive sorting of the evidence might have led to an agreement that Steve's underperformance was not universal but instead largely connected to the quality of the reports he submitted or failed to submit. In another situation, it might be agreed that a purchasing manager was weak when it came to finding offshore suppliers and to voicing his ideas in meetings, or a new investment professional and his boss might come to agree that his performance was subpar when it came to timing the sales and purchase of stocks, but they might also agree that his financial analysis of stocks was quite strong. The idea here is that before working to improve performance or reduce tension in a relationship, an agreement must be reached about what areas of performance contribute to the contentiousness. We used the word evidence earlier in discussing the case of Steve and Jeff. That is because a boss needs to back up his performance assessments with facts and data, that is, if the intervention is to be useful. They H6952.INB 67.2/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 68. Cannot be based on feelings, as in Jeff telling Steve, "I just have the feeling you're not putting enough energy into the reports." Instead, Jeff needs to describe what a good report should look like and the ways in which Steve's reports fall short. Likewise, the subordinate must be allowed, indeed, encouraged, to defend his performance, compare it with colleagues' work, and point out areas in which he is strong. After all, just because it is the boss's opinion does not make it a fact. Third, the boss and the subordinate should arrive at a common understanding of what might be causing the weak performance in certain areas. Once the areas of weak performance have been identified, it is time to unearth the reasons for those weaknesses. Does the subordinate have limited skills in organizing work, managing his time, or working with others? Is he lacking knowledge or capabilities? Do the boss and the subordinate agree on their priorities? Maybe the subordinate has been paying less attention to a particular dimension of his work because he does not realize its importance to the boss. Does the subordinate become less effective under pressure? Does he have lower standards for performance than the boss does? It is also critical in the intervention that the boss bring up the subject of his own behavior toward the subordinate and how this affects the subordinate's performance. The boss might even try to describe the dynamics of the set-up-to-fail syndrome. Does my behavior toward you make things worse for you, he might ask, or, what am H6962.18/18/16956 am. The set-up-to-fail syndrome. 69. I doing that is leading you to feel that I am putting too much pressure on you. This component of the discussion also needs to make explicit the assumptions that the boss and the subordinate have thus far been making about each other's intentions. Many misunderstandings start with untested assumptions. For example, Jeff might have said, when you did not supply me with the reports I asked for, I came to the conclusion that you were not very proactive. That would have allowed Steve to bring his buried assumptions into the open. No, he might have answered, I just reacted negatively because you asked for the reports in writing, which I took as a sign of excessive control. Fourth, the boss and the subordinate should arrive at an agreement about their performance objectives and on their desire to have the relationship move forward. In medicine, a course of treatment follows the diagnosis of an illness. Things are a bit more complex when repairing organizational dysfunction, since modifying behavior and developing complex skills can be more difficult than taking a few pills. Still, the principle that applies to medicine also applies to business. Boss and subordinate must use the intervention to plot a course of treatment regarding the root problems they have jointly identified. The contract between boss and subordinate should identify the ways they can improve on their skills, knowledge, experience, or personal relationship. It should also include an explicit discussion of how much and what type of future supervision the boss will have. No boss, of H6952/18/16956 am. Ongoing feedback. 70. Course, should suddenly abdicate his involvement. It is legitimate for bosses to monitor subordinates' work, particularly when a subordinate has shown limited abilities in one or more facets of his job. From the subordinate's point of view, however, such involvement by the boss is more likely to be accepted, and possibly even welcomed, if the goal is to help the subordinate develop and improve over time. Most subordinates can accept temporary involvement that is meant to decrease as their performance improves. The problem is intense monitoring that never seems to go away. Fifth, the boss and the subordinate should agree to communicate more openly in the future. The boss could say, next time I do something that communicates low expectations, can you let me know immediately? And the subordinate might say, or be encouraged to say, next time I do something that aggravates you or that you do not understand, can you also let me know right away? Those simple requests can open the door to a more honest relationship almost instantly. No easy answer. Our research suggests that interventions of this type do not take place very often. Face-to-face discussions about a subordinate's performance tend to come high on the list. of workplace situations people would rather avoid. Because such conversations have the potential to make both parties feel threatened or embarrassed. Subordinates are reluctant to trigger the discussion because they are H6952.INB 72/18/16956 AM. The setup to fail syndrome. 71. Read about coming across as thin-skinned or whiny. Bosses tend to avoid initiating these talks because they are concerned about the way the subordinate might react. The discussion could force the boss to make explicit his lack of confidence in the subordinate, in turn putting the subordinate on the defensive and making the situation worse. 2. As a result, bosses who observe the dynamics of the setup to fail syndrome being played out may be tempted to avoid an explicit discussion. Instead, they will proceed tacitly by trying to encourage their perceived weak performers. That approach has the short-term benefit of bypassing the discomfort of an open discussion, but it has 3 major disadvantages. First, a one-sided approach on the part of the boss is less likely to lead to lasting improvement because it focuses on only one symptom of the problem, the boss's behavior. It does not address the subordinate's role in the underperformance. Second, even if the boss's encouragement were successful in improving the employee's performance, a unilateral approach would limit what both he and the subordinate could otherwise learn from a more upfront handling of the problem. The subordinate, in particular, would not have the benefit of observing and learning from how his boss handled the difficulties in their relationship. Problems the subordinate may come across someday with the people he manages. Finally, bosses trying to modify their behavior in a unilateral way often end up going overboard. They should generally give the subordinate more autonomy and responsibility than he can handle productively. Predictably. H6952.INB 71/2/18/16956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 72. The subordinate fails to deliver to the boss's satisfaction, which leaves the boss even more frustrated and convinced that the subordinate cannot function without intense supervision. We are not saying that intervention is always the best course of action. Sometimes, intervention is not possible or desirable. There may be, for instance, overwhelming evidence that the subordinate is not capable of doing his job. He was a hiring or promotion mistake, which is best handled by removing him from the position. In other cases, the relationship between the boss and the subordinate is too far gone, too much damage has occurred to repair it. And nowly, sometimes bosses are too busy and under too much pressure to invest the kind of resources that intervention involves. Yet often the biggest obstacle to effective intervention is the boss's mindset. When a boss believes that a subordinate is a weak performer and, on top of everything else, that person also aggravates him, he is not going to be able to cover up his feelings with words. His underlying convictions will come out in the meeting. That is why preparation for the intervention is crucial. Before even deciding to have a meeting, the boss must separate emotion from reality. Was the situation always as bad as it is now? Is the subordinate really as bad as I think he is? What is the hard evidence I have for that belief? Could there be other factors, aside from performance, that have led me to label this subordinate a weak performer? Aren't there a few things that he does well? He must have displayed above average qualications when we decided to hire him. Did these qualications evaporate all of a sudden? H6952.INB 72.18/16/16956 AM. The setup to fail syndrome. 73. The boss might even want to mentally play out part of the conversation beforehand. If I say this to the subordinate, what might he answer? Yes, sure, he would say that it was not his fault and that the customer was unreasonable. Those excuses, are they really without merit? Could he have a point? Could it be that, under other circumstances, I might have looked more favorably upon them? And if I still believe I'm right, how can I help the subordinate see things more clearly? The boss must also mentally prepare himself to be open to the subordinate's views, even if the subordinate challenges him about any evidence regarding his poor performance. It will be easier for the boss to be open if, when preparing for the meeting, he has already challenged his own preconceptions. Even when well prepared, bosses typically experience some degree of discomfort during intervention meetings. That is not all bad. The subordinate will probably be somewhat uncomfortable as well, and it is reassuring for him to see that his boss is a human being, too. Calculating costs and being TS. As we've said, an intervention is not always advisable. But when it is, it results in a range of outcomes that are uniformly better than the alternative, that is, continued underperformance and tension. After all, bosses who systematically choose either to ignore their subordinates' underperformance or to opt for the more expedient solution of simply removing perceived weak performers are condemned to keep repeating the same mistakes, finding and training replacements for perceived weak. H6952.INB 73.2/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 74. Performers is a costly and recurrent expense. So is money. Touring and controlling the deteriorating performance of a disenchanted subordinate. Getting results in spite of one's staff is not a sustainable solution. In other words, it makes sense to think of the intervention as an investment, not an expense, with the payback likely to be high. How high that payback will be and what form it will take obviously depend on the outcome of the intervention, which will itself depend not only on the quality of the intervention but also on several key contextual factors. How long has that relationship been spiraling downward? Does the subordinate have the intellectual and emotional resources to make the effort that will be required? Does the boss have enough time and energy to do his part? We have observed outcomes that can be clustered into 3 categories. In the best case scenario, the intervention leads to a mixture of coaching, training, job redesign, and a clearing of the air. As a result, the relationship and the subordinate's performance improve, and the costs associated with the syndrome go away or, at least, decrease measurably. In the second best scenario, the subordinate's performance improves only marginally, but because the subordinate received an honest and open hearing from the boss, the relationship between the two becomes more productive. Boss and subordinate develop a better understanding of those job dimensions the subordinate can do well and those he struggles with. This improved understanding leads the boss and the subordinate to explore H6972/18/16/956 AM. The setup to fail syndrome. 75. Together how they can develop a better T between the job and the subordinate's strengths and weaknesses. That improved T can be achieved by significantly modifying the subordinate's existing job or by transferring the subordinate to another job within the company. It may even result in the subordinates choosing to leave the company. While that outcome is not as successful as the RST one, it is still productive. A more honest relationship eases the strain on both the boss and the subordinate, and in turn, on the subordinate's subordinates. If the subordinate moves to a new job within the organization that better suits him, he will likely become a stronger performer. His relocation may also open up a spot in his old job for a better performer. The key point is that, having been treated fairly, the subordinate is much more likely to accept the outcome of the process. Indeed, recent studies show that the perceived fairness of a process has a major impact on employees' reactions to its outcomes. See Fair Process. Managing in the Knowledge Economy by W. Chan Kim and Renee Morborn, HBR July-August 1997. Such fairness is a being T even in the cases where, despite the boss's best efforts, neither the subordinate's performance nor his relationship with his boss improves significantly. Sometimes this happens, the subordinate truly lacks the ability to meet the job requirements, he has no interest in making the effort to improve, and the boss and the subordinate have both professional and personal differences that are irreconcilable. In those cases, however, the intervention still yields indirect being TS. Because, even if termination follows, other employees H6052.75/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 76. Within the company are less likely to feel expendable or betrayed when they see that the subordinate received fair treatment. Prevention is the best medicine. The setup to fail syndrome is not an organizational fate accompli. It can be unwound. The RST step is for the boss to become aware of its existence and acknowledge the possibility that he might be part of the problem. The second step requires that the boss initiate a clear, focused intervention. Such an intervention demands an open exchange between the boss and the subordinate based on the evidence of poor performance, its underlying causes, and their joint responsibilities, culminating in a joint decision on how to work toward eliminating the syndrome itself. Reversing the syndrome requires managers to challenge their own assumptions. It also demands that they have the courage to look within themselves for causes and solutions before placing the burden of responsibility where it does not fully belong. Prevention of the syndrome, however, is clearly the best option. In our current research, we examine prevention directly. Our results are still preliminary, but it appears that bosses who manage to consistently avoid the setup to fail syndrome have several traits in common. They do not, interestingly, behave the same way with all subordinates. They are more involved with some subordinates than others. They even monitor some subordinates more than others. However, they do so without disempowering and discouraging subordinates. H6952.INB 76.2/18/16/956 AM. The setup to fail syndrome. 77. How? One answer is that those managers begin by being actively involved with all their employees, gradually reducing their involvement based on improved performance. Early guidance is not threatening to subordinates, because it is not triggered by performance shortcomings. It is systematic and meant to help set the conditions for future success. Frequent contact in the beginning of the relationship gives the boss ample opportunity to communicate with subordinates about priorities, performance measures, time allocation, and even expectations of the type and frequency of communication. That kind of clarity goes a long way toward preventing the dynamic of the setup to fail syndrome, which is so often fueled by unstated expectations and a lack of clarity about priorities. For example, in the case of Steve and Jeff could have made explicit very early on that he wanted Steve to set up a system that would analyze the root causes of quality control rejections systematically. He could have explained the benefits of establishing such a system in the initial stages of setting up the new production line, and he might have expressed his intention to be actively involved in the system's design and early operation. His future involvement might then have decreased in such a way that could have been jointly agreed on at that stage. Another way managers appear to avoid the setup to fail syndrome is by challenging their own assumptions and attitudes about employees on an ongoing basis. They work hard at resisting the temptation to categorize employees in simplistic ways. They also monitor their own H6952.INB 77.2/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 78. Reasoning. For example, when feeling frustrated about a subordinate's performance, they ask themselves, what are the facts? They examine whether they are expecting things from the employee that have not been articulated. And they try to be objective about how often and to what extent the employee has really failed. In other words, these bosses delve into their own assumptions and behavior before they initiate a full-blown intervention. Finally, managers avoid the setup to fail syndrome by creating an environment in which employees feel comfortable discussing their performance and their relationships with the boss. Such an environment is a function of several factors: the boss's openness, his comfort level with having his own opinions challenged, even his sense of humor. The net result is that the boss and the subordinate feel free to communicate frequently and to ask one another questions about their respective behaviors before problems mushroom or ossify. The methods used to head off the setup to fail syndrome do, admittedly, involve a great deal of emotional investment from bosses, just as interventions do. We believe, however, that this higher emotional involvement is the key to getting subordinates to work to their full potential. As with most things in life, you can only expect to get a lot back if you put a lot in. As a senior executive once said to us, the respect you give is the respect you get. We concur. If you want, indeed, need, the people in your organization to devote their whole hearts and minds to their work, then you must, too. H6952.78/18/16/956 AM. The Setup to Fail Syndrome. 79. Notes. 1. The inus of expectations on performance has been observed in numerous experiments by Duff Eden and his colleagues. See Duff Eden, Leadership and Expectations, Pygmalion Effects and Other Self-Fulfilling Prophecies in Organizations Leadership Quarterly, Winter 1992, Volume 3, No. 4, pp. 271305. 2. Chris Argyris has written extensively on how and why people tend to behave unproductively in situations they see as threatening or embarrassing. See, for example, Knowledge for Action, A Guide to Overcoming Barriers to Organizational Change, San Francisco. Josabase, 1993. Jean-François Manzoni is Professor of Management Practice and the Shell-chaired Professor in Human Resources and Organizational Development at INSEAD, Singapore campus. He is a co-author, along with Jean-Louis Basu, of The Setup to Fail Syndrome, How Good Managers Cause Great People to Fail, Harvard Business School Press, 2002. Jean-Louis Basu is a research fellow at INSEAD, where he specializes in organizational behavior. He is the co-author with Susan C. Schneider of Managing Across Cultures. H6952.792/18/16/956 AM. H6952.82/18/16/956 AM. 81. Chapter 6. How to Give Feedback That Helps People Grow. By Monique Valcourt. Over the years, I've asked hundreds of students in my executive education courses what skills they believe are essential for leaders. The ability to give tough feedback comes up frequently. But what exactly is tough feedback? The phrase connotes bad news, like when you have to tell a team member that they've screwed up on something important. Tough also signifies the way we think we need to act when giving negative feedback, resolute and unyielding. But the word also points to the discomfort some of us experience when giving negative feedback, and to the adapted from content posted on hbr.org on the 11th of August 2015. H6952.81/18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 82. Challenge of doing so in a way that motivates change instead of making the other person feel defensive. Managers fall into a number of common traps. We might be angry at an employee and use the conversation to blow off steam rather than to coach Or we may delay giving a needed critique because we anticipate that the employee will become argumentative and refuse to accept responsibility. We might try surrounding negative feedback with praise, like disguising a bitter-tasting pill in a spoonful of honey. But this approach is misguided, because we don't want the constructive message to slip by unnoticed. Instead, it's essential to create conditions in which the receiver can take in feedback, RECT on it, and learn from it. To get a feel for what this looks like in practice, I to pose two feedback conversations that occurred following a workplace ICT. MJ Paulietz, a physical therapist in the Passaic Northwest, was treating a hospital patient. One day when a fellow staff member paged her following procedure, she excused herself and stepped out of the treatment room to respond to the page. The colleague who sent it didn't answer her phone when MJ called, nor had she left a message describing the situation that warranted the page. This happened 2 more times in the same treatment session. The third time she left her patient to respond to the page, MJ lost her cool and left an angry voicemail message. Upset upon hearing the message, her colleague reported it to their supervisor as abusive. MJ's RST feedback session took place in her supervisor's office. She recalls, when I went into his office, he H6952. In Beatty 22/18/16 AM. How to give feedback that helps people grow. 83. Had already decided that I was the person at fault. He had all the information he needed, and he wasn't interested in hearing my side of the story. He did not address the 3 times she pulled me out of patient care. He did not acknowledge that that might have been the fuse that set me off. Her supervisor referred MJ to the Human Resources Department for corrective action. She left seething with a sense of injustice. MJ describes the subsequent feedback conversation with human resources as transformative. The woman in HR could see that I had a lot of just under the surface feelings, and she acknowledged them. She said, I can only imagine what you're feeling right now. Here you are in my office, in corrective action. If it were me, I might be feeling angry, frustrated, embarrassed. Are any of these true for you? That made a huge difference. With trust established, MJ was ready to take responsibility for her behavior and commit to changing it. Next, the HR person said, now let's talk about how you reacted to those feelings in the moment. She created a space that opened up a genuine dialogue. The subsequent conversation created powerful learning that has stuck with MJ to this day. Oftentimes when we're feeling a strong emotion, we go down what the HR person called a cow path because it's well worn, very narrow, and always leads to the same place. Let's say you're angry. What do? You blow up. It's okay that you feel those things, it's just not okay to blow up. She asked me to think about what I could do to get on a different path. The feedback from the HR person helped me learn to end the space between what I'm feeling and the next H6952. In Beatty 32/18/16/956 am. Ongoing feedback. 84. Thing that slides out of my mouth. She gave me the opportunity to grow internally. What made it work was establishing a safe space, trust, and rapport, and then getting down to you need to change, rather than starting with you need to change, which is what my supervisor did. I did need to change, that was the whole point of the corrective action. But she couldn't start there, because I would have become defensive, shut down, and not taken responsibility. I still to this day think that my co-worker should have been reprimanded. But I also own my part in it. I see that I went down that cow path, and I know that I won't do it a second time. What people are saying on hbr.org. In any feedback session, the intention of the giver determines how the message is delivered, the approach, manner, tone, and words used. If there is trust between the giver and the receiver, and consideration and openness, with the giver's sole focus on the receiver's growth, the feedback may still be tough but also positive. Posted by Cindy. When feedback is tough, it means the giver is not yet ready to deliver it. It is tough because it involves behaviors and feelings the giver cannot understand and control. Feedback should never be tough because it needs to be factual and constructive, based on the H6952. In Beatty 42/18/16/956 am. How to give feedback that helps people grow. 85. Process that has led someone to act in a certain way. Asking open-ended questions is a sure way to make it more effective. Posted by Michelle. One of my all-time workplace pet peeves is bosses who hear a complaint, jump to conclusions, and refuse to even entertain another side of the story. It's one thing for a manager to have his or her own opinions on what's good performance and what's not, and to refuse to debate them. And I can understand a boss taking action, under some circumstances, if multiple customers or co-workers have complained, without necessarily endorsing the substance of their complaints. But it's out wrong to conclude that someone had in fact done something wrong, just on someone else's say-so. Posted by J.E. Ree. The difference in the two sessions MJ described boils down to coaching, which deepens self-awareness and catalyzes growth, versus reprimanding, which sparks self-protection and avoidance of responsibility. To summarize, powerful, high-impact feedback conversations share the following elements. An intention to help the employee grow. The point of the discussion is not to simply tell them what H6952. In Beatty 52/18/16/956 am. Ongoing feedback. 86. They did wrong. The feedback should increase, not drain, the employee's motivation and resources for change. When preparing for a feedback conversation, RECT on what you hope to achieve and on what impact you'd like to have on them, perhaps by doing a short meditation just before the meeting. Openness on the part of the feedback giver. If you start off feeling uncomfortable and self-protective, Your employee will match that energy, and you'll each leave the conversation frustrated with the other person. By remaining open to their point of view, you'll create a high-quality connection that facilitates change. A collaborative mindset. Invite the employee into the problem-solving process. Ask questions such as, what ideas do you have? What are you taking away from this conversation? What steps will you take, by when, and how will I know? Giving developmental feedback that sparks growth is a critical challenge to master, because it can make the difference between an employee who contributes powerfully and positively to the organization and one who feels diminished by the organization and contributes far less. A single conversation can switch an employee on, or shut them down. A true leader sees the raw material for brilliance in every employee and creates the conditions to let it shine, even when the challenge is tough. H6952.in86/18/16/956 AM. How to give feedback that helps people grow. 87. Monique Valcour is an executive coach, keynote speaker, and faculty affiliate of Third Path Institute. Her coaching, research, and consulting help companies and individuals craft high-performance, meaningful jobs, careers, work places, and lives. H6952.in87/18/16/956 AM. H6952.in82/18/16/956 AM. 89. Chapter 7. Recognize good work in a meaningful way. By Christina Bilasca-Duvernay. Recognition gets great lip service. Ask 3 managers if they consider it important to recognize the value their teams deliver, and chances are very good that you'll get 3 positive responses. But probe a little bit, and you'll discover that the walk is leagues away from the talk. Manager 1 makes recognition a priority when he has time to think about it. For Manager 2, recognizing her team means having sandwiches brought in once or twice a quarter for a conference room lunch. Manager 3 is fairly consistent in doling out praise and rewards. Adapted from content posted on hbr.org on the 29th of February 2008. H6952.18/16/956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 90. Too consistent, in fact. The boilerplate language in his thank you notes and the inevitable $25 gift certificate to a family-style chain restaurant have become an in-joke among his team members, generating eye rolls more than anything else. For recognition to strengthen your team's performance, say Adrian Gostick and Chester Elton, authors of The Carrot Principle, How the Best Managers Use Recognition to Engage Their People, Retain Talent, and Excel. At performance, it can't be haphazard, generalized to the group, or generic. So what characterizes recognition that actually works? Deliver recognition frequently. Once or twice a quarter won't cut it, as Manager 2 has not yet realized. Research conducted by the Gallup Organization, Washington, D.C., found that employees engage Ment and motivation are strongly affected by how often they receive recognition for their work. 3 years after the U.S. branch of accounting RM. KPMG introduced its recognition program, Encore, the number of employees who agreed with the statement, "Taking everything into account, this is a great place to work," rose 20%. In analyzing the program's effectiveness unit by unit, Sylvia Brands, KPMG's U.S. Director of Compensation, discovered that units offering their employees less frequent recognition suffered notably higher turnover than units in which recognition was a frequent occurrence. So how frequently should you let your team members know you recognize and appreciate their efforts? At least once every other week. H6992/18/16956 AM. Recognize good work in a meaningful way. 91. We're not talking gold watches here, point out goes Tick and Elton. Managers who earn the most trust and dedication from their people do so with many simple but powerful actions they write in the carrot principle. These can include sending them a sincere thank you note, copying them on a memo praising their performance, or taking a moment in the weekly staff meeting to highlight their actions. To keep yourself on track, Gostick and Elton recommend maintaining a simple recognition scorecard for every employee that notes the date praise was given and for what. Tie the message to organizational values. If you want recognition to reinforce the sort of thinking and behavior you'd like to see more of, connect your praise explicitly to the values of the organization, whether that's the team, the unit, or the company as a whole. If you're making a connection to company values, keep in mind that they may be less than clear to the employee. So many companies' mission or values statements go wrong, says Gostick. Either it's a laundry list or it lauds such feel-good but generic values as hard work, service, innovation, and so on. The result is that no one really knows what values or behaviors really matter. And even when the values are clearly denied and kept to a manageable number, employees are notorious for ignoring or tuning out the various means by which a company seeks to communicate them. When's the last time you read the entire email update from your CEO? Or resisted the urge to dawdle with your mobile device during a speech about the company's values? H6992/18/16956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 92. But the moment of personal recognition is one time that the employee is not tuning out. And if this occasion is before a group of her peers, chances are that many of them, particularly if they like and respect her, are also paying attention. So when you single out an individual for praise, whether it's in a one-on-one meeting or before a group, link that person's behavior with the organization's values. For example, thank you, Peter, for going the extra mile to keep our client happy. As you know, our team is trying to improve its service renewal scores, and this client is one of our biggest accounts, so your actions really mean a lot. That was a great idea to invite the special projects team to our staff meeting. We talk a lot around hear about the value of cross-unit collaboration. But we don't always do such a good job of actually doing it. I really appreciate your efforts in this area, thanks. Match the award to the achievement. Remember Manager 3 and his $25 restaurant gift certificates. His recognition efforts met with derision because he dispensed them without regard to the degree of the employee's effort or achievement. Someone who came in over the weekend to integrate the latest data into an important report would receive the same reward as someone whose 3-month-long project unearthed an opportunity to eliminate $50,000 annually in unit expenses. H6952.922/18/16956 AM. Recognize good work in a meaningful way. 93. It's demotivating to give someone a minor award for a major accomplishment, says Gostick. It's a slap in the face. But before you think in purely monetary terms about what would be appropriate for a certain level of achievement, consider the NAL quality of effective recognition. Tailor rewards to the individual. What's meaningful to one employee versus another can vary significantly. A particularly ambitious employee might really value face time with the CEO or appointment to a high-level project team as recognition for her efforts. A very conscientious employee who always seems to have trouble leaving the office might get more out of an explicit directive to take a day off and take his family to the zoo, courtesy of the company. Cash awards, say Gostick and Elton, tend not to be as worthwhile as thank yous, unless they're quite substantial, $1,000 or more. Instead of using the money to buy something special and memorable, most employees just use it to pay bills and quickly forget about its significance. Don't forget teams. Manager 2's mistake was to try to acknowledge individuals' efforts by giving blanket recognition to the group. It's a tactic that's next to useless. But when your team as a whole achieves goals, recognizing its accomplishments is perfectly appropriate. And don't wait until the particular project is near completion. In sports, we don't wait for the team to win before we applaud, we celebrate each incremental step toward H6952.932/18/16956 AM. Ongoing feedback. 94. Victory, says Gostick. Yet in business, there's this tendency to wait until the project is clearly working well before we celebrate anything. At the start of a project, set short-term goals and articulate the reward the team will receive for reaching them, he advises. Each milestone reached presents an occasion to celebrate everyone's contribution to the group effort, reinforce the project's importance, and ignite the team's commitment to working together creatively and collaboratively in pursuit of the end goal. Whether you're acknowledging the accomplishments of a team or an individual, recognition can be a key motivator toward pushing your direct reports to the next level. Christina Bielaska-Juvenay was the editor of Harvard Management Update. H6952/18/16956 AM. Section 2. Formal performance appraisals. H6952/18/16/956 AM. H6952.96/18/16/956 AM. 97. Chapter 8. Delivering an effective performance review by Rebecca Knight. When performance review season arrives, you know the drill. Drag each of your direct reports into a conference room for a one-on-one, hand them an official-looking document, and then start in with the same tired conversation. Say some positive things about what the employee is good at, then some unpleasant things about what he's not good at, and end, wearing your most solicitous smile, some more ego strokes. The result, a mixed message that leaves even your best employees feeling disappointed. Adapted from content posted on hbr.org on 3 November 2011. H6952.97/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 98. Your formal review sessions with your employees don't need to be so tiresome or confusing. If you take the right approach, appraisals are an excellent opportunity to keep solid performers moving onward and upward, and redirect the poor ones. What the experts say. For many employees, a face-to-face performance review is the most stressful work conversation they'll have all year. For managers, the discussion is just as tense. What a performance appraisal requires is for one person to stand in judgment of another. Deep down, it's uncomfortable, says Dick Groter, author of How to Be Good at Performance Appraisals. Evaluating an employee's job performance should consist of more than an annual chat. According to James Barron, the William S. Bainek Professor of Management at Yale School of Management. Performance management is a process, he says. Presumably, you're giving a tremendous amount of real-time feedback, and your employees are people you know well. Hopefully, your relationship can survive candid feedback. No matter what kind of appraisal system your company uses, here are several strategies to help you make performance review season less nerve-wracking and more productive. Set expectations early. The performance review doesn't start with a sit-down in the spare conference room. You must be clear from the outset how you'll evaluate your employees. Groter suggests holding performance planning sessions with each H6952.98/18/16/956 AM. Delivering an effective performance review. 99. Of your direct reports at the beginning of the year to discuss that person's goals and your expectations. See Chapter 11, How to Set and Support Employee Goals. You'll see immediate improvement in performance because everyone knows what the boss expects, he says. And it earns you the right to hold people accountable. At the end of the year, listen carefully to your employees' personal ambitions, as it will inform the way you assess their work. Oftentimes, managers are evaluating performance without necessarily knowing what that person's career aspirations are. We often assume that everyone wants to be CEO. But that's not always the case, says Baron. Understanding what your direct reports want from their careers will help you go out. Ways to broaden their professional experiences. Lay the groundwork. About 2 weeks before the face-to-face review, ask your employee to jot down a few things he's done over the last year that he's proud of. This will both help refresh your memory and put a positive focus on an event that is so often seen as negative, says Grota. Next, review other notes you've kept on him throughout the year. A well-executed project, a deadline missed, the deft handling of a difficult client. Finally, ask for feedback from others in the company who work closely with your employee. The larger number of independent evaluations, the better, says Baron. About an hour before the meeting, give your employee a copy of his appraisal. That way, he can have his initial emotional response, positive or negative, in the privacy of his own cubicle. When H6952.992/18/16956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 100. People read someone's assessment of them, they are going to have all sorts of churning emotions, says Grota. Let them have that on their own time, and give them a chance to think about it. Then with a calmer, cooler head, the employee can prepare for a rational and constructive business conversation. Set the tone. Too often, the face-to-face conversation takes the form of a feedback sandwich: compliments, criticism, more praise. But this approach demoralizes your stars and falsely encourages your poor performers. Instead, pick a side. Most people are good solid workers, so for the vast majority, you should concentrate exclusively on things the person has done well, says Grota, adding that this method tends to motivate people who are already competent at their jobs. For your marginal workers, however, do not sugarcoat bad news. Performance reviews are your chance to confront poor performers and demand improvement. People are resilient, says Grota. As time goes on, that person is not going to get a promotion and not going to get a raise. You're not doing this person any favors by avoiding their decencies. For more on dealing with those who are not meeting expectations, see Chapter 14, How to Help an Underperformer. Constructively coach. After discussing the strengths and achievements of your solid performers, ask them how they feel about how things are going. In most cases, you're dealing with mature adults and you'll elicit their honest concerns. H6952.102/18/16956 AM. Delivering an effective performance review. 101. Says Grota. For both solid and poor performers, frame feedback in terms of a stop, start, and continue model. Suggests Baron. What is the employee doing now that is not working? What actions should they adopt to be more successful? What are they doing that is highly effective? Focusing on behaviors, not dispositions, takes the personal edge out of the conversation. Give specific advice and targeted praise. Don't say things like, "You need to be more proactive." That doesn't mean anything. Say something like, "You need to take more initiative in calling potential sales leads." Similarly, saying, "You're an innovator" is nice, but it's helpful to know exactly what they're doing that acts that says Baron. Hold your ground. The hot button issues associated with performance reviews are money and rank. If your company allows it, separate any talk of compensation from the performance review. But if you must, do not save the salary information for the end of the conversation, says Grota. Otherwise there'll be an invisible parrot above the employee's head squawking, "How much?" throughout the entire discussion. Rank is another place for potential bruised feelings. A majority of companies require managers to rate their employees, often on a scale of 1 to 5. Your goal is go over the data and make a judgment call. Remember, the 1-5 system is not analogous to the AF grading scheme. In school, most employees will get the middle rank, a 3. This might leave some employees feeling let down, thinking they're merely average. Don't cave in. In the corporate world, you're dealing with a highly selective H6952.int 101/18/16956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 102. Group, says Grota. The rules of the game have changed. In school, AC was mediocre, but a 3 in the working world means they're meeting expectations. They're shooting par. Conveying that message is a leadership challenge. People can accept it rationally, but it may be hard to accept viscerally, he says. This is why it's so important to hold a performance planning meeting at the outset. If they hit their targets, they are a 3. It's a goal. Principles to remember. Make it clear at the beginning of the year how you'll evaluate your employees with individual performance planning sessions. Give your employees a copy of their appraisal before the meeting so they can have their initial emotional response in private. Deliver a positive message to your good performers by concentrating mainly on their strengths and achievements during the conversation. Note specific behaviors you want your employee to stop, start, and continue. Case study #1, understand expectations and set the right tone. Ben Snyder, not his real name, an expat working in London at a global media company, was new at his job. He'd inherited an employee, Jim, whose primary responsibility was to travel to Africa, the Middle East, and Russia to H6952.int 102/18/16956 AM. Delivering an effective performance review. 103. Develop partnerships that would ultimately drive sales to Ben's business. But Jim wasn't delivering. During quarterly performance reviews, Jim and I had long conversations about his approaches and the great relationships he was developing. I would tell him how glad I was that people were talking to him, that he was forming these relationships. But I also told him that we needed tangible deals, says Ben. This happened for 3 straight quarters, same conversation, no deals. Increasingly, Ben was under pressure. Sure, Jim was spending a lot of the company's money with nothing to show for it. I needed to scare him into action. At the next performance review, I gave Jim 90 days to close a deal. Nothing changed, and Jim was dismissed. Even when we sat down with HR and let him go, he was genuinely surprised, recalls Ben. In retrospect, Ben says he went overboard in validating Jim's spade work, and didn't establish the right tone. During their conversations, the message wasn't clear. Jim only heard what he wanted to hear, the positive praise about the relationship building. He ignored the demand to close deals. Ben also should have worked harder in the beginning to understand the specics of Jim's job and set clear expectations. It was a business I wasn't familiar with. I didn't know how to push him in the right direction, because I wasn't exactly sure what he was doing. I had never really sat down with him and decided what success should look like. H6952.132/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 104. Case study #2, be clear and specific. Lucy Oren, name has been changed, worked as a director of business development at a biotech startup in New Jersey. She managed Peter, who was, according to Lucy, a real star. He was smart, very conscientious, and good at everything he tried. One of Peter's biggest responsibilities was giving presentations. One of the vice presidents at my company brought it to my attention that Peter used a certain crutch phrase too often, and that while he was a good speaker, he was very deliberate in the way that he spoke, which was sometimes too slow. She thought it connoted a lack of energy. I thought it was a relatively minor problem, but I decided to bring it up in the performance appraisal. During the face-to-face discussion, however, Lucy chickened out. Peter was so good at his job, that I was reluctant to give him any criticism, she says. I tried to couch the advice when we were discussing his strengths. He didn't get it. At the very end of the conversation, Lucy highlighted areas of improvement. She told Peter to try to be more upbeat during his presentations. But the advice was too vague. Peter wasn't sure what to do with the recommendation. The next few presentations he gave were pretty rocky. He overcompensated, recalls Lucy. After one of his presentations, Lucy realized she needed to be more specific with her coaching. She warned him of the crutch phrase and told him to try to speak faster. H6942.142/18/16/956 AM. Delivering an effective performance review. 105. Peter came through, and improved on every level. He still uses the crutch phrase every so often, but there is more momentum to his presentations. Rebecca Knight is a freelance journalist in Boston and a lecturer at Wesleyan University. Her work has been published in the New York Times, USA Today, and the Financial Times. H6952.152/18/16/956 AM. H6952.162/18/16/956 AM. 107. Chapter 9. Managing Performance. when it's hard to measure. By Jim Whitehurst. Organizations of all kinds have long struggled to accurately measure the performance of individual members. The typical approach is to assess an individual's performance against a metric usually tied to whether or not they performed a task and the amount of output they generated by doing so. There's a lot riding on these assessments, everything from compensation increases and bonus payments to promotions. And as anyone who has ever given or received a traditional performance review, adapted from content originally posted on hbr.org on the 11th of May, 2015. H6952.107/18/16/956 am. Formal performance appraisals. 108. Knows, this process can be highly subjective, even in the most metrics-obsessed organizations. But what about the kinds of jobs where measuring someone's output isn't about counting the number of widgets they produced, but rather it's about how they managed a team or influenced others or helped people collaborate better? While it might be easy to measure someone's output on an assembly line, how do we decide how well a manager manages or a leader leads? In the case of an organization like Red Hat, where I am the CEO, which collaborates with many open source software communities like Linux and OpenStack, these questions are all the more difficult to answer, like how to measure someone's contribution to an external community, and traditional performance reviews just don't cut it for us. For example, building enterprise open source software, like we do at Red Hat, involves collaborating with people outside of the company who volunteer their efforts. That means you can't simply issue orders or direct what work gets done and when. What you can do is build intimacy and trust with other members of the community. But doing that can involve making contributions that offer no direct output or result. It's not quid pro quo, and it's not easy to track and measure. Conventional performance reviews can also undermine a company's agility and lead to missed opportunities. See the sidebar Deloitte's performance snapshot. What happens when an individual's goals no longer make sense because the competitive landscape has changed? But their performance rating, and by extension, their H6952.182/18/16/956 am. Managing performance when it's hard to measure. 109. Compensation and advancement opportunities, is resting on the completion of those goals. That's not a system that promotes innovation. How do you even begin to appraise someone's performance in these scenarios? At Red Hat, we've developed a simpler, more accessible approach to performance reviews, one that doesn't limit managers to narrow measures of performance. Agree on employee objectives. We've found that it's essential to ensure that associates and their managers are on the same page when it comes to the responsibilities and expectations for the role. We encourage people to track what's important and to set individual goals that contribute to our company's mission and strategy. We recommend a regular check-in process to keep managers and associates in sync. However, we've found it best to let managers and associates determine the frequency of those meetings. Some take place weekly. Others happen on a monthly or quarterly basis. Get input from others. When measuring against these goals, we rely not only on the manager's observations, but also on associates' peers and communities to informally assess how people perform. We pay attention to their reputations and how they are regarded by others. We look at the scope and quality of their innuos. The result is that rather than managing up to their boss to get a good review, Red Hatters are accountable to the community as a whole. H6992.192/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 110. Focus on opportunities, not scorekeeping. Our associates are incredibly talented, passionate people. We don't want them to zate on a number or letter grade. So we don't hand them a bottom-line score to sum up last year's performance. Instead, we focus on developing their strengths and growing their capabilities. We advise managers to give continuous, real-time feedback throughout the year and to use the annual review as an opportunity to reflect back on everything their associates have achieved, what they've learned along the way, and what opportunities they will pursue in the coming months. Unlike many companies, we don't expect our managers to tee people to a bell curve with a maximum number of low and high performers. Instead, we tell them to pay attention to both performance and potential and to focus on connecting their people with opportunities for growth and development. Deloitte's Performance Snapshot by Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall. At Deloitte we're redesigning our performance management system. Like many other companies, we realize that our current process for evaluating the work of our people, and then training them, promoting them, and paying them accordingly, is increasingly out of step with our objectives. H6992.110/18/16/956 AM. Managing performance when it's hard to measure. 111. In a public survey Deloitte conducted recently, more than half the executives questioned, 58%, believe that their current performance management approach drives neither employee engagement nor high performance. They, and we, are in need of something nimble, real-time, and more individualized, something squarely focused on fueling performance in the future, rather than assessing it in the past. What might surprise you, however, is what we'll include in Deloitte's new system and what we won't. It will have no cascading objectives, no once-a-year reviews, and no 360-degree feedback tools. We've arrived at a very different and much simpler design for managing people's performance. Its hallmarks are speed, agility, one-size-fits-one, and constant learning. And it's underpinned by a new way of collecting reliable performance data. Rather than asking more people for their opinion of a team member, in a 360-degree or an upward feedback survey, for example, we found that we will need to ask only the immediate team leader, but, critically, to ask a different kind of question. People may rate other people's skills inconsistently, but they are highly consistent when rating their own feelings and intentions. To see performance at the individual level, then, we will ask team leaders, not about the skills of each team member. Continued. H6952.111/2/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 112. Continued. But about their own future actions with respect to that person. At the end of every project, or once every quarter. For long-term projects, we will ask team leaders to respond to 4 future-focused statements about each team member. 1. Given what I know of this person's performance, and if it were my money, I would award this person the highest possible compensation increase and bonus. 2. Given what I know of this person's performance, I would always want him or her on my team. 3. This person is at risk for low performance. 4. This person is ready for promotion today. In EECT, we are asking our team leaders what they would do with each team member rather than what they think of that individual. When we aggregate these data points over a year, weighting each according to the duration of a given project, we produce a rich stream of information for leaders' discussions of what they, in turn, will do, whether it's a question of succession planning, development paths, or performance pattern analysis. H6952.112/2/18/16/956 AM. Managing performance when it's hard to measure. 113. In addition to this consistent and countable data, when it comes to compensation, we want to factor in some uncountable things, such as the difficulty of project assignments in a given year and contributions to the organization other than formal projects. So the data will serve as the starting point for compensation, not the ending point. The NAL determination will be reached either by a leader who knows each individual personally or by a group of leaders looking at an entire segment of our practice and at many data points in parallel. We could call this new evaluation a rating, but it bears no resemblance, in generation or in use, to the ratings of the past, because it allows us to quickly capture performance at a single moment in time. We call it a performance snapshot. Adapted from Reinventing Performance Management, Harvard Business Review, April 2015, reprint #R1504b. Marcus Buckingham provides performance management tools and training to organizations. He is the author of several best-selling books and Standout 2.0, Assess Your Strengths, Find Your Edge, Win at Work. Harvard Business Review Press, 2015. Ashley Goodall is the Director of Leader Development at Deloitte Services LP, based in New York. H6952.113/2/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 114. Emphasize achievement, not just advancement. Finally, when it comes to promotions, raises, and bonuses, we don't force managers to apply a merit matrix or rigid formula. Instead, we give them the ability to make decisions that are right for their people. This means our managers don't have to enter inaccurate ratings to game the system, a problem faced by many other companies. The conventional way to reward top performers is to promote them into managerial roles. This often creates an army of ineffective and unengaged managers. But we have come to embrace the concept of a career of achievement in addition to a career of advancement. Some of the most influential leaders in our organization do not have fancy titles or even people who directly report to them. They are expert individual contributors who help shape the direction and priorities of Red Hat and key open source communities through their contributions and thought leadership. A great example is Marin Duffy, one of our user-interface designers. Marin started working at Red Hat as an intern and later joined us full-time in 2005, after she graduated from college. While Marin has made exceptional contributions to our core Red Hat Enterprise Linux product, she has also earned a stellar reputation throughout the company, as well as open source communities, for her reasoned and intelligent contributions to mailing list conversations on everything from the CRE H6952.114/18/16956 AM. Managing performance when it's hard to measure. 115. Ation of Red Hat's mission statement to contentious internal debates. It was in a case involving the latter that led Red Hat's Executive Vice President and Chief People Officer Delisa Alexander to approach Marin to talk about a proposed project. In other words, a senior leader in the company went directly to someone working closer to the front lines to gather feedback on a fairly major corporate-wide decision, simply because Delisa knew that Marin could help make or break the success of the NAL decision based on her level of influence throughout the company. A traditional performance review rating could never capture the kind of influence Marin has built inside our organization and the communities we participate in. Even a 360-degree review from her immediate peers or manager wouldn't reach far enough to show Marin's impact. But everyone at Red Hat knows who Marin is, because her contributions shape many areas of the company, with a performance management process that emphasizes individual development, influence, and innovation. Red Hat is able to retain and grow passionate, talented associates like Marin. Jim Whitehurst is the president and CEO of Red Hat, the world's leading provider of open source enterprise IT products and solutions, and the author of the book The Open Organization, Harvard Business Review Press. 2015. H6952.115/18/16956 AM. H6952.116/18/16956 AM. 117. Chapter 10. Stop worrying about your employees' weaknesses. By Peter Bremen. Your son comes home one day, looks down at his feet, and gives you his report card. You smile at him as you open it up and look inside. Then your smile disappears when you see the F in math. You also see an A, English, and 2 Bs, his Tory and science. You look down at him and ask, "What happened in math, Johnny? Why did you get this F?" We want our kids to be successful at everything they do. And if they're not good at something, we ask why they failed. We tell them to work harder at it. Understand what went wrong, focus, and exit. Adapted from content posted on hbr.org on the 19th of May, 2009. H6952.inb 117 2/18/16 9:56 am. Formal performance appraisals. 118. What people are saying on hbr.org. A great manager recognizes the strengths of their people and then puts them in position to win. A performance review would serve the company better if it were less a report card and more of a coaching session. The manager should focus on providing the necessary resources to the employee, in your example. Someone who loves spreadsheets, and removing the obstacles so that the employee can win. Given that the employee is in the right position, it is often the manager who is the obstacle to success. Posted by Ted. This is a Terry C. approach to managing and motivating employees. If you take it one step further and share individual members' strengths with the whole team, they begin to see each other for the unique qualities they bring. They even begin to rely on each other in new ways. And, focusing on strengths lets an employee's gifts shine and productivity climbs and confidence grows. Posted by Amy. Some respondents have criticized your example about the salesperson and the spreadsheet. However, that I actually become more proficient in weak areas by partnering with an expert who will do the work and also explain things to me in terms I can understand. Posted by Mary. H6952.inb 118 2/18/16 9:56 am. Stop worrying about your employees' weaknesses. 119. I'm a presentation skills coach, and I always try to coach people to focus on their strengths and build on what they do well. The more comfortable and confident people get, the more their weaknesses will disappear. People often ask for constructive criticism and want to know what they're doing wrong. They're not doing anything wrong. They can be coached to do something different that might compensate for their temporary shortcomings. Posted by Steve. But that's a mistake. The wrong focus. If you dwell on Johnny's failure, on his weakness, you will be setting him up for a life of struggle and low self-esteem while reducing his chances of reaching his full potential. And you won't fix his weakness. You'll just reinforce it. The problem with a report card is that it measures all students against the same criteria, which ignores that each student is different, with unique talents, distinct likes and dislikes, and particular aspirations. And when we see the F on Johnny's report card, it's easy for us to get distracted from our primary job, to help him deeply enjoy his life and fulfill his potential by developing and deriving pleasure from his unique talents. Fast forward 20 years. Johnny is now an adult. As he sits down for a performance review with his manager, she spends a few quiet minutes looking over his review and then raises her eyes to meet his H6952.inb 119 2/18/16 9:56 am. Formal performance appraisals. 120. You've worked hard this year, John. Your client Orion Tashan is superb. You've met your sales goals, and you're a solid team player. But you have an area that needs development, specifically, your detail orientation. The spread sheets we get from you are a mess. Let's talk about how you can get better in that. An A, 2 Bs, and an F. And his manager handles it the same way his parent did. By focusing the conversation and John's effort on his least favorite and weakest area. We have a report card problem in our companies, and it's costing us a tremendous amount of time, money, potential, and happiness. It's costing us talent. Traditional management systems encourage mediocre righty in everything and excellence in nothing. Most performance review systems set an ideal picture of how we want everyone to act, standards, competencies, and so on, and then assess how closely people match that ideal, nudging them to improve their weaknesses so they meet or exceed expectations in every area. But how will John add the most value to his organization? He's amazing with people, not spreadsheets. He'll work hardest, derive the most pleasure, and contribute his maximum potential with the greatest result if he is able to focus as much time as possible in his area of strength. Which means taking his focus off developing the things in which he's weak. They're just a distraction. Here's what his manager should say: you've worked hard this year, John. Your client orientation is superb. You've met your sales goals, and you're a solid team player. But working on those spreadsheets isn't a good H6922.122/18/16/956 AM. Stop worrying about your employees' weaknesses. 121. Use of your time, and it's not your strength. I'm going to ask David to do those for you from now on. He loves spreadsheets and is great at them. I want to spend the rest of our time talking about how you can get even better at working with your clients. That's where you shine. Where you add the most value to the company, and you seem to really enjoy it. An organization should be a platform for unique talent. A performance review system should be exible enough to RECT and reward the successful contributions of diverse employees. Let's acknowledge that no one can possibly be great at everything, and place all our effort on developing their strengths further. If it's impossible to take away the part of their job in which they're weak, then help them improve just enough so that it doesn't get in the way of their strength. If you can't take the spreadsheets away from John, help him get a C and move on. That would be preferable to spending the time and effort it would take for him to get an A or even a B. Peter Bremen is CEO of Bremen Partners, a company that strengthens leadership in people and in organizations through programs, including the Bremen Leadership Intensive, coaching, and as a consultant to CEOs and their leadership teams. Best-selling author of 18 Minutes, his most recent book is 4 Seconds. H6952.121/2/18/16/956 AM. H6952.int 122/18/16956 AM. 123. Chapter 11. How to set and support employee goals. By Amy Gallo. As you think about how employees should be developing and what their future looks like, you must also think about the goals they should be aspiring to. Employees want to see how their work contributes to larger corporate objectives, and setting the right targets makes this connection explicit for them and for you, their manager. A performance planning meeting shortly after the review session affords you an opportunity to collaborate with your direct report on goals for the upcoming year, since where your employees need to improve will be fresh on your mind. Within this conversation, you can adapt it from content posted on hbr.org on the 7th of February 2011. H6952.int 123/18/16956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 124. Discuss not only your perception of where your employees should devote their time, but also what they want in their own career and how they are going to reach those milestones. What the experts say. How involved should you be in helping employees establish and achieve their goals? Since failure to meet goals can have consequences for you, your employee, and your team, as well as the broader organization, you need to balance your involvement with the employee's ownership over the process. Linda Hill, co-author of Being the Boss: The 3 Imperatives for Becoming a Great Leader, says, a manager's job is to provide supportive autonomy that's appropriate to the person's level of capability. The key is to be hands-on while giving your people the room they need to succeed on their own. Here are some principles to follow as you navigate how to best craft goals and support your people in reaching their objectives. Connect employee goals to larger company goals. For goals to be meaningful and effective in motivating employees, they must be tied to larger organizational ambitions. Employees who don't understand the roles they play in their company's success are more likely to become disengaged. Achieving goals is often about making trade-offs when things don't go as planned. Employees need to understand the bigger picture to make those trade-offs when things go wrong, says Hill. No matter what level the employee is at, they should be able to H6952.int 124/18/16956 AM. How to set and support employee goals. 125. Articulate exactly how their efforts feed into the broader company strategy. Make goals attainable but challenging. Since employees are ultimately responsible for reaching their goals, they need to have a strong voice in setting them. However, you need to support them through this process by providing input and direction regarding what the company is trying to achieve. Ask your employee to draft goals that directly contribute to the organization's mission. Once they've suggested an initial list, discuss whether the targets are both realistic and challenging enough. Stretch targets emerge as a process of negotiation between the employee and the manager, says Srikant M. Data, the Arthur Lowes Dickinson Professor of Accounting at Harvard University. Be careful, though. Your team members are likely to resent you if you insist on goals that are too challenging to accomplish. Don't aim too low, either. If you are overly cautious, you will miss opportunities and settle for mediocrity. When done well, stretch goals create a lot of energy and momentum in an organization, says data. But when done badly, they do not achieve the goal of motivating employees and helping them achieve better performance as they were designed to do. Even worse, poorly set goals can undermine employees' morale and productivity, and the organization's performance overall. Create a plan for success. Once a goal is set, ask your employee to explain how they plan to meet it. Have them break it down into tasks and H6952.INP 125/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 126. Set interim objectives, especially if it's a large or long-term project. Ask your employee, what are the appropriate milestones? What are possible risks, and how do you plan to manage them? Because targets are rarely pursued in a vacuum, Hill suggests that you help your people understand who they are dependent on to achieve those goals. Then problem solve with them on how to best use those people to get the job done. Monitor progress. Staying on top of employee progress will help head off any troubles early on. We often get problems because we don't signal that we are partners in achieving goals, says Hill. Don't wait for review time or the end of a project to check in. Review long-term and short-term goals on a weekly basis. Even your high-performing employees need ongoing feedback and coaching. Ask your employee what type of monitoring and feedback would be most helpful to them, especially if the task is particularly challenging or something they are doing for the rest time. Assist in problem solving. Very few of us reach our goals without some bumps along the way. Build relationships with employees so that they feel comfortable coming to you if and when problems arise. If your employee encounters an unforeseen obstacle, the goal may need reworking. First, however, ask them to bring a potential solution to you so you can give them coaching and advice. If their efforts to solve the problem fail, you will need to get further involved. H6952.INP 126/18/16/956 AM. How to set and support employee goals. 127. Sculpt for personal goals. Some managers neglect to think about what an employee is personally trying to accomplish in the context of work. If I account for the interests of the whole person, not just the work person, I'm going to get more value from them, says Stuart D. Friedman, author of Total Leadership. Be a better leader, have a richer life. For example, if your employee has expressed an interest in teaching, but that is not part of their job responsibilities, you may be able to find ways to sculpt that job to include opportunities to train peers or less experienced colleagues. See the sidebar Job Sculpting. Job Sculpting by Timothy Butler and James Waldrop. Job sculpting is the art of matching people to jobs through a customized career path that allow their deeply embedded life interests to be expressed, and increase the chance of retaining talented people. Since an effective performance review dedicates time to discussing past performance and plans for the future, it presents an opportune time to job sculpt. Managers don't need special training to job sculpt. They just need to start listening more carefully when employees describe what they like and dislike about. Continued. H6952.INP 127/2/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 128. Continued. Their jobs. Consider the case of a pharmaceutical company executive who managed 30 salespeople. In a performance review, one of her people offhandedly mentioned that her favorite part of the past year had been helping their division end new OCE space and negotiating for its lease. In the past, the executive would have paid the comment little heed. After all, what did it have to do with the woman's performance in sales? But listening with the ears of a job sculptor, the executive probed further, asking, what made the search for new OCE space fun for you, and how was that different from what you do day to day? The conversation revealed that the saleswoman was actually very dissatisfied and bored with her current position and was considering leaving. In fact, the saleswoman yearned for work that met her deeply embedded life interests, which had to do with ingenuous through language and ideas and creative production. Her sales job in passed the former, but it was only when she had the chance to think about the location, design, and layout of the new OCE that her creativity could be fully expressed. The manager helped the woman move to a position where her primary responsibility was to design marketing and advertising materials, along with listening carefully and asking probing questions during the performance review. Managers. H6952.INP 128/2/18/16/956 AM. How to set and support employee goals. 129. Can ask employees to play an active role in job sculpting before the meeting starts. In most corporate settings, the employee's preparation for a performance review includes a written assessment of accomplishments, goals for the upcoming review period, skill areas in need of development, and plans for accomplishing both goals and growth. During the review, this assessment is then compared to the supervisor's assessment. But imagine what would happen if employees were also expected to write up their personal views of career satisfaction. Imagine if they were to prepare a few paragraphs on what kind of work they love, or if they described their favorite activities on the job. Because so many people are unaware of their deeply embedded life interests, not to mention unaccustomed to discussing them with their managers, such exercises might not come easily at RST. Yet they would be an excellent starting point for a discussion, ultimately allowing employees to speak more clearly about what they want from work, both in the short and long term. And that information would make even the best job sculpting managers more effective. Once managers and employees have discussed deeply embedded life interests, it's time to customize the next work assignment accordingly. In cases where the employee requires only a small change in his continued H6000-129-2/18/16956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 130. Continued activities that might just mean adding a new responsibility. For example, an engineer who has a deeply embedded life interest in counseling and mentoring might be asked to plan and manage the orientation of new hires. Or a logistics planner with a deeply embedded life interest in Inuit through language and ideas could be given the task of working on recruitment at college campuses. The goals here would be to give some immediate gratification through an immediate and real change in the job, and to begin the process of moving the individual to a role that more fully satisfies him. Adapted from Job Sculpting, The Art of Retaining Your Best People. Harvard Business Review, September-October 1999, reprint #99502. Timothy Butler is Director of Career Development Programs at Harvard Business School and author of Getting Unstuck, How Dead Ends Become New Paths. James Waldrop is a founding principal of the consulting RM Peregrine Partners. The RST step is for you to understand what these goals are. Ask employees if they have any personal goals they want to share with you. Don't pressure them, they should share these aspirations only if they feel comfortable. Friedman suggests you then ask, what adjustments might we try that would help you achieve your goals? H6952.132/18/16956 AM. How to set and support employee goals. 131. This allows the employee to take ownership of the solution. Just as with work goals, you need to be sure personal goals contribute to your team, unit, or to the company. It's got to be a shared commitment to experiment and mutual responsibility to check in on how it's going. It's got to be a win for both, says Friedman. Hold people accountable, including yourself. There will be times, even with the best support, when employees fail to meet their targets. Hill advises, hold people accountable. You can't say, gee, that's too bad. You need to go out what went wrong and why. Discuss with your employee what happened and what each of you think went wrong. If the problem was within their control, ask them to apply the possible solutions you've discussed, take another stab at reaching the goal, and check in with you more frequently. If it was something that was outside their power or the goal was too ambitious, acknowledge the disappointment but don't dwell on it. Do the diagnosis, get the learning, and move on, says Hill. As discussed in Chapter 5, The Setup to Fail Syndrome, it's possible that you may have contributed to the problem. Be willing to RECT on your role in the failure. Were you too hands-off, and fail to check in frequently enough? Did you not review the work in a timely way? Have an open conversation about what you can do next time. If you don't hold yourself accountable, they're going to have trouble with you, says Hill. H6952.131/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 132. Principles to remember. Do. Connect individuals' goals to broader organization objectives. Show employees that you are a partner in achieving their goals. Learn about and incorporate employees' personal interests into their professional goals. Don't allow employees to set goals alone. Take a hands-off approach with high performers. Ignore failures. Case study: a partner in goal attainment. Megan Lantier is known at Bliss PR for being a natural people developer. As the vice president of the RM's Financial Services practice, Megan manages several NIA account executives, including Shauna Ellison, not her real name. Megan has overseen Shauna's work since Shauna started at Bliss 4.5 years ago. Since the beginning, they have set goals through a collaborative process. Shauna develops draft goals, Megan comes up with goals she believes Shauna needs to focus on, and then they identify the overlap between them. I want to make sure they are manageable but stretched. H6952.132/18/16/956 AM. How to set and support employee goals. 133. 2 says Megan. The two regularly check in on these goals. Megan takes a hands-on approach, providing Shauna with regular input. They also sit down together at least 4 times a year to have a more formal discussion about Shauna's ambitions. One of Shauna's goals is to become more of a thought leader on one of their largest financial services accounts. She has mastered the day-to-day work of managing the client and now needs to focus on the bigger picture. Shauna has been working on this goal for several months now by speaking up more in client meetings and providing more input into the content, not just the process, of their work. We don't need a goal review session. I give her constant feedback in the context of the work, says Megan. Megan also knows that, ultimately, Shauna is responsible for her own achievements. I'm fully invested in making it work, but I realized the limitations I have as a manager to make it happen, she says. It hasn't been necessary to talk about the consequences if Shauna fails to meet the goal. There are natural consequences in Bliss's high-performing culture. If you don't succeed, you don't get the better assignments. Amy Gallo is a contributing editor at Harvard Business Review and the author of the HBR Guide to Managing ICT at Work. H6952.133/18/16/956 AM. H6952.134/18/16/956 AM. 135. Chapter 12. When to grant a promotion or raise. By Amy Gallo. Managers who want to recognize employees for good work have many tools at their disposal. One of the more traditional ways to reward a top performer is to give her a promotion or raise, or both. Even if you don't openly talk about this in your performance review session, as discussed in Chapter 8, Delivering an Effective Performance Man's review, it's often something a manager will think about, or an employee will ask about, around formal appraisal time. But how can you know whether someone is ready for the next challenge or deserving of that bump in pay? Who? Man resource policies and company culture often dictate when and how people move up in a company. However, adapted from content posted on hbr.org on the 12th of January 2011. H6952.int135 2/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 136. Managers in most companies have a good deal of input into the decision and, in some cases, they are the ultimate decision makers. Whether you have this authority or not, you need to make promotions and raises part of an ongoing discussion with employees about their performance. What the experts say. According to Herminia Ibarra, the Cora-chaired Profs. Of Leadership and Learning and Faculty Director of the INSEAD Leadership Initiative, many times a manager feels responsible for funding their people their next step in the organization. Managers should make these decisions about promotions and raises carefully. I think who an organization promotes is a very strong index of their core culture, says Susan David, co-director of the Institute of Coaching, founding director of evidence-based psychology. Managers should recognize that who they reward sends a signal to the rest of the organization. Therefore, they need to be sure they are endorsing behavior that is in line with the organization's values. For example, an employee who exceeds his targets but treats his team members poorly should not be rewarded in an organization that values teamwork. Similarly, the way an organization promotes people has implications for an individual's success. Organizations often assume that a promotion should involve giving star performers responsibility for managing more people and developing, rather than just executing strategy. Yet these are not areas of genius for all. Many organizations lose some of their best operational people. H6952.int136 2/18/16/956 AM. When to grant a promotion or raise. 137. Because they create single pathways to organizational success, says David. It's possible to reward people in other ways. Organizations that create multiple able pathways to success will keep their best people, keep them engaged, and keep them for longer, she says. Next time you are trying to decide whether to recognize strong performance with a promotion or raise, follow these principles. Assess current performance using multiple sources. As a first step, make sure the employee is able to do the job you are considering promoting her into. Take a look at her performance. There will be markers even in the current job that show how they'll do in the new role, says David. She recommends you use multi-source feedback. Draw not only on your own assessment but also on others. It is especially important to seek input from people who interact with the employees in ways that you don't. Talk to peers, team members, and people she manages. In some cases, you may ND that she's already doing parts of The new job. Some people do their job as it is described. And some enlarge their job, they innovate around the parameters of the job. That's the best evidence of all, when they're already doing the job, says Ibarra. Consider the competence challenge. Balance. We all want to be and feel we are good at things. We also have the need to feel we are growing and learning, says David. A good indicator that you may need to promote. H6952.INP 137 2/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 138. Someone is if he expresses a desire to learn more and take on a new challenge. Your goal-setting discussion will help you assess this. People who are particularly good at their jobs may quickly master them and need to be stretched. If in their current jobs employees are reaching points where they are overqualified, this is a strong risk factor for disengagement and loss of those employees, says David. You need to constantly assess your people and be sure they are working at the edges of their abilities. If they are performing well but not learning anything new, a promotion or an alternative assignment may be best for both the individual and the organization. Make sure it's a good match. Before promoting someone into a new role, consider whether it's something she will enjoy doing. Many managers fail to consider that just because someone is good at a job, doesn't mean she will take pleasure in it. One of the greatest tools a manager can use is an authentic, honest conversation with the individual, explains David. Ask your employee whether she is interested in and excited about the new responsibilities. If not, consider creating an alternative role that stretches her, fulfills her, and LLS a need in the organization. Experiment before making the job permanent. Occasionally, you may need more information to judge the employee's expected performance in a new role. As Ibarra says, it gets tricky when performance in a current role is not a good predictor of performance in a new role. In these cases, design an assignment that is similar to the tasks and challenges of the new job to test the H6952.INP 138 2/18/16/956 AM. When to grant a promotion or raise. 139. Employee's ability. Be transparent with the employee about this experiment. Make it short-term, and outline clear success criteria and an evaluation timeline. Be careful, though, you don't want to invisibly promote your people without recognizing their contributions. Providing more responsibility without a corresponding change in title or raise can sap motivation. Determine fair compensation. With some promotions, it may be obvious how much of a raise you should give based on how much others do in the same job are paid. However, many job changes are not as clear-cut. The employee may be retaining some of her former responsibilities while taking on new ones. Create a job description for the new role. Take a look at all her duties and try to benchmark them against other jobs in the company or in the broader employment market. If you don't have similar positions in the organization, look at increases that went with other promotions in the organization. If most promotions come with a particular increase in salary, stick with a similar percentage. Know when to say no. There are people who will ask for a promotion even if they're not ready, says Ibarra. Your job is to help calibrate those requests. If your employee raises the idea of a promotion but you worry he's not ready, have an open discussion to hear his reasoning and share your concerns. Be clear about what competencies or experiences he needs to gain to be promoted and create an action plan for how he can do that. Provide him with the tasks and assignments he needs to expand his skills. H6952.INT 139 2/18/16956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 140. Because of a limited budget, you may have to say no to someone who is deserving. Or there may not be the right opportunity to promote. David says, there needs to be a strategic need in the organization that this person can meet. These can be tough conversations. Be honest and transparent. Explain the rationale, and be sure the employee understands that you value him. Give him stretch goals that help prepare him for the future when the company is better positioned to give him a promotion or raise. Consider other ways to motivate. Most important, other ways to keep the employee engaged. Leaders are often comforted by their capacity to give a raise or a promotion because these strategies are seen as tangible and executable. However, while these extrinsic motivators are a useful and important part of keeping employees engaged, they are certainly not the only ones, says David. Instead, rely on intrinsic motivators, such as recognizing contributions, providing opportunities to gain new skills or experiences, and supporting autonomy and choice within a job. See Chapter 7, Rec. Own use good work in a meaningful way. For example, you may have leeway as a manager to make modifications to the employee's current position so that he is spending half of his time on his current job and the other half on new, more challenging responsibilities. Doing this may be more motivational in the long run and can of 10 inspire loyalty over reliance on pay and promotion. As motivators leads to an organizational culture that is very transactional and disengaged, says David. Employees who feel valued are likely to wait out the hard times. H6952.INT 142/18/16956 AM. When to grant a promotion or raise. 141. Principles to remember. Do make sure your people are working at the edge of their abilities. Create an assignment that helps you assess whether the employee will excel in a new role. Find other ways beyond raises and promotions to motivate your people. Don't say no to a request for a raise or promotion without a clear explanation. Rely solely on your assessment of the employee's performance without asking others for input. Assume that a promotion alone will make the employee happy. What people are saying on HBR.org. Employee turnover is thought to be one of the biggest upcoming costs and challenges for companies. If that's the case, companies need to be proactive in keeping their top players around. Extrinsic motivators. Like money and promotions are great, but they're not enough to keep people engaged and motivated. Continued. H6952.INP141 2/18/16956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 142. Continued. Towers Watson White Paper Turbocharging Employee Engagement, the Power of Recognition from Manag. The main thing is that strong manager performance in recognizing employee performance increases engagement by almost 60%. Real-time recognition for tasks well done and employees aligning themselves with company values is a powerful tool not to be overlooked. Recognition and rewards are key to maintaining a motivated workforce. Posted by Sarah. My current position is in a not-for-profit community health care facility. Funding is primarily through grants and Medicare or Medicaid. These sources have already been shrinking and more cuts are coming. There have been no bonuses for 2 years, and raises vanished before that. In addition, more responsibility is a growing burden for staff. Combine that with the economic hardship of the employees' families and the need for other types of recognition and reward becomes imperative, otherwise, they will be owed to ND higher paying jobs. Your idea of an employee spending half of his time on his current job and the other half on new, more challenging responsibilities then, for us, also has an additional positive EECT, more gets done by fewer staff and it helps to prevent burnout by providing variation in tasks, duties, and new co-workers. Posted by Betty. H6952.INP142 2/18/16956 AM. When to grant a promotion or raise. 143. Case Study 1, a new role for the firm. And the employee. Elise Genesee was hired by a strategy consulting RM. As the executive assistant to the managing partner. A year into the job, she was receiving glowing reviews and Shanti Nayak, the RM's director of people, says it was clear that she was a star performer. In particular, Shanti noted that Elise had done a great job of building relationships with clients. Her relationships had been instrumental in setting up key appointments and ensuring that bills got paid. The managing partner felt she was ready to move up. But according to Shanti, there was no typical role for people to move into unless they were on the traditional consultant path. At the time, the RM didn't have a staff member dedicated solely to business development. People throughout the RM were doing it as an extracurricular task. However, the tough economic climate forced the RM to develop a much more formalized process and needed someone to be responsible for it. Shanti explains that they had 2 debates going on simultaneously. Was this a role they needed? And, if so, was Elise the right person for the role? While Elise was doing small pieces of client development already, she had never led a role like this before. Shanti knew that Elise had worked hard to develop the right relationships both inside and outside the RM, and she had confidence Elise could do it. When she talked to others in the RM, they endorsed her assessment. In the end, Shanti says, it felt like a risk worth taking. Shanti explained that since this was a new position, it was difficult to decide how much to pay Elise once she was promoted. H6952.INP 143 2/18/16 9:56 am. Formal performance appraisals. 144. They looked at what other promotions carried in terms of a raise, in particular, the percentage increase that associates received when they became senior associates. Elise was given a similar percentage increase and a new title, Manager of Business Development. Case Study 2, an apprenticeship model for on-the-job learning. When Sarah Viner joined the International Rescue Committee as the Senior Human Resource Partner, she was particularly impressed with Nicole Clements, an HR administrator. Nicole was studying for her master's degree while working full-time. She commuted 2 hours by bus to her job, using that time to study. Nicole had always received very good reviews. Sarah thought, here's a high-potential person who has earned her right to development. When Sarah sat down with her for their RST review together, Nicole asked, "What's the path ahead for me?" She had applied for an open HR partner role, but because it was 2 steps up from her current role, the organization didn't feel she was ready. Without a logical next step, however, Nicole would be stuck in her current role. As a manager, I owed her a career path, but I didn't have the budget to create a new role and hire a new admin, says Sarah. Instead, she decided to create an alternative role for Nicole. Nicole would continue her duties as an HR administrator but also take on 2 of Sarah's client groups to manage. This apprentice model would allow Nicole to learn on the job what it means to be an HR partner, with Sarah providing her feedback and support. It helps her. H6952.INP 144 2/18/16 9:56 am. When to grant a promotion or raise. 145. Learn in a manageable, supported way, rather than trial by explains Sarah. Sarah spoke with the leaders of each client group. She made it clear that although Nicole was still learning the role, she would make their groups her RST priority and Sarah would be there if any issues came up. I asked for their help and explained the bean. T, says Sarah. Nicole has since taken on more responsibility, and Sarah says she is well on her way to qualifying for the partner role. Amy Gallo is a contributing editor at Harvard Business Review and the author of the HBR Guide to Managing Con ICT at Work. H6952.INP 145 2/18/16 9:56 am. H6952.INP 146 2/18/16 9:56 am. 147. Chapter 13. Tips for record keeping. To prepare for annual reviews, many managers find it useful to keep a electronic or hard copy on every employee's performance and update it throughout the year. Documenting employee performance entails SPE. Seal legal considerations, so consult your human resource manager or internal legal team. If you don't have either resource in your organization, consult a lawyer who specializes in employment law. This is especially advisable when a person's performance is beginning to suffer or if you may need to read them. Here are a few things to consider when preparing employee records. Record the date and specifics of what occurred. Jane started sending detailed agendas prior to our weekly meeting with marketing, thereby allowing everyone time to prepare and send adjustments as H6000-147-2/18/16/956 AM. Formal performance appraisals. 148. Necessary. This helped the team dive in and cover a large number of topics in a short period of time. Stick to the facts, note the behaviors. For example, Joe's follow-up email campaigns increased sales by 10%, rather than judgments. For example, Mary doesn't know how to manage her time. Whenever possible, make your notes on the same day that you've given someone feedback, while it's still fresh in your mind. Hang on to emails or notes that highlight the accomplishments of your employee, whether they're instances you've noticed yourself or praise from others. For performance issues, document the issue and the next steps, including timelines, action items, training, specific goals, and expected outcomes. Check in, via email or a face-to-face meeting, with other people who are in a position to evaluate your employee's performance, such as direct reports, clients, vendors, and peers. Ask for feedback on qualities or behaviors, including specifics, examples that support their observations. Document their feedback, and add it to your LO. Request regular informal progress reports from your employee that explain how their work is progressing, as well as any concerns or problems they may be having. This will tip you off if there are any issues brewing in your employee's performance. H6000-152.148/18/16/956 AM. Tips for record keeping. 149. And give you the heads up about what they plan to do next. When it comes time to conduct your employee's annual review, the bulk of the work will already be done, since you'll have kept such good notes. Your task will then be merely to review and ND common themes, rather than rack your brain for highlights or relying on only the most recent performance. H6000-152.149/18/16/956 AM. H6000-152.18/16/956 AM. Section 3. Tough topics. H6000-152.151/18/16/956 AM. H6000-152.2/18/16/956 AM. 153. Chapter 14. How to Help an Underperformer. By Amy Gallo. As a manager, you can't accept underperformance. It's frustrating, it's time-consuming, and it can demoralize the other people on your team. But what do you do about an employee whose performance isn't up to snuff? How do you provide them with the feedback they need and help turn around the problematic behavior? And how long do you let it go on before you cut your losses? By facing the issue head-on and creating a correction plan with your employee, you can set your underperformer on the path for improvement. What the experts say. Your company may have a prescribed way of handling an underperformer, but most of those recommended. Adapted from content posted on hbr.org on the 23rd of June, 2014. H6052.153/18/16/956 am. Tough topics. 154. Processes aren't that useful, says Jean-François Manzoni. INSEAD professor and co-author of the book The Set Up to Fail Syndrome, How Good Managers Cause Great People to Fail. When you talk to senior executives, they'll usually acknowledge that those don't work, he says. So, it's up to you as the manager to go out what to do. When people encounter an issue with underperformance, they really are on their own, says Joseph Wayne Trobe, co-author of The Coaching Manager, Developing Top Talent in Business. Here's how to stage a productive intervention. Don't ignore the problem. Too often, underperformance issues go unaddressed. Most performance problems aren't dealt with directly, says Wayne Trobe. More often, instead of taking action, the manager will transfer the person somewhere else, or let him stay put without doing anything. This is the wrong approach. Never allow underperformance to on your team. It's rare that these situations resolve themselves, and they will likely get worse. You'll become more and more irritated, and that's going to show and make the person uncomfortable, says Manzoni. If a problem arises, take steps toward solving it as soon as possible. Consider what's causing the problem. Is the person a poor T for the job? Do they lack the necessary skills? Or have they just misunderstood expectations? When it comes to performance, it's common to end mismatches between what managers and employ. H6954-2/18/16/956 am. How to help an underperformer. 155. Think is important, Wayne Trobe explains. Consider the role you might be playing in the problem. You may have contributed to the negative situation, says Manzoni. After all, it's rare that it's all the subordinates' fault. Just as it's rare that it's all the boss's. Don't focus exclusively on what the underperformer needs to do to remedy the situation. Think about what changes you can make as well. Ask others what you might be missing. Before you act, look at the problem objectively. Talk to the person's previous boss or someone who's worked with them, or conduct a 360 review. When approaching other people, though, do it carefully and confidentially. Manzoni suggests you say something like, I'm worried that my frustration may be clouding my judgment. All I can see are the mistakes he's making. I want to make an honest effort to see what I'm missing. Look for evidence that proves your assumptions wrong. Talk to the underperformer. Once you've checked in with others, talk to the employee directly. Explain exactly what you're observing, point to ways the team's work is affected, and make clear that you want to help. Manzoni suggests the conversation go something like this: I'm seeing issues with your performance. I believe that you can do better, and I know that I may be contributing to the problem. So how do we get out of this? How do we improve? It's important to engage the person in brainstorming solutions. Ask them to come up with ideas, says Weintraub. Don't expect H6952.INB 155/18/16/956 AM. Tough topics. 156. An immediate response though. They may need time to digest your feedback and come back later with some proposals. Confirm that the person is coachable. In most cases, the next step would be to arrange ongoing feedback or coaching sessions. But you can't coach someone who doesn't agree that they need help. In the initial conversation, and throughout the intervention, the employee must acknowledge the problem. If someone says, I am who I am, or implies that they're not going to change, then you've got to make a decision whether you can live with the issue and at what cost, says Weintraub. On the other hand, if you see a willingness to change and a genuine interest in improving, chances are you can work together to turn things around. Make a plan. Once you've confirmed that the person is coachable, create a concrete plan for what both you and the employee are going to do differently, agreeing on measurable actions so you can mark progress. Write down the specific goals to be met and plan the execution of these tasks by assigning start and end dates. Then identify what resources the employee needs to accomplish those goals, whether time, equipment, or assistance or coaching from others. Once you've outlined everything on paper, ask them how they feel about the plan, answering any questions or clarifying any points as necessary. You don't want them to make promises they can't meet. And you want to make sure you're in agreement moving. H6952.INB 156/18/16/956 AM. How to help an underperformer. 157. Forward. Then, give them time. Everyone needs time to change and maybe learn or acquire new skills, says Weintraub. Regularly monitor progress. Once the conversation is over, the manager's work isn't done. You must follow up to make sure that the correction plan is being implemented. Ask the person to check in with you regularly, or set up specific dates in the future to check progress. It may be helpful to ask the employee if they have someone they'd like you to enlist in the effort. Weintraub suggests you ask, is there anyone you trust who can provide me with feedback about how well you're doing in making these changes? Doing this sends a positive message. It says, I want this to work and I want you to feel comfortable. I'm not going to sneak around your back. Respect confidentiality. Along the way, it's important to keep what's happening confidential, while also letting others know your work on the underperformance problem. Manzoni admits that this is a tricky balancing act. don't discuss the SPE/CIC details with others, he says. But you might tell them something like, Bill and I are working together on his output and lately we've had good discussions. I need your help in being as positive and supportive as you can. Praise and reward positive change. If the person makes positive changes, say so. Make clear that you've noticed developments, and reward your H6092/157/18/16/956 AM. Tough topics. 158. Employee accordingly. At some point, if the non-performer has improved, be sure to take them off the death spiral. You want a team that can make mistakes and learn from them, says Weintraub. If there isn't improvement, take action. Of course, if things don't get better, change the tenor of the discussion. At some point you leave coaching and get into the consequences speech. You might say, let me be very clear that this is the third time this has happened, and since your behavior hasn't changed, I need to explain the consequences, says Weintraub. Discipline. RE actions, particularly letting someone go, shouldn't be taken lightly. When you re somebody, it not only affects that person, but also you, the RM, and everybody around you, says Manzoni. While it may be painful to re someone, it may be the best option for your team. It's disheartening if you see the person next to you not performing, says Weintraub. Manzoni elaborates, the person you're asking to leave is only one of the stakeholders. The people left behind are the more important ones. When people feel the process is fair, they are willing to accept a negative outcome. Principles to remember. Do. Take action as soon as possible. The sooner you intervene, the better. Consider how you might be contributing to the performance issues. H6952.int158.2/18/16/956 AM.